My name is Jim Brown. I'm a senior designer from Epic Games. And now that you've had a chance to get some hands-on time with the engine, I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of insight into the design process that we use to actually make the levels that we make for our games. And then when I'm done, James is going to give a little bit talk, more kind of a high level on how we actually, some of the tools that we can use to make the games themselves. So we're going to kind of move up from there. Before I get too far into things, just out of my own personal curiosity, how many programmers do we have here? Good mix. Any designers? Artists? Awesome. So, very, very good mix. I have been at Epic for about a dozen years now. I've been using these tools since the very, very first iteration of Unreal Engine 1, which is good because I kind of knew my way around a little bit. But it's also bad in that a lot of times I'll end up using some jargon or things that you may not understand, which is just second nature to me. So if at any time I say something you don't understand, please feel free to just raise your hand, interrupt me, ask questions, whatever. We'll have some time for QA at the end of my talk for the stuff specifically here. James will have some at the end of his talk, and then we'll kind of combine forces into Voltron and do the super answer QA question session. All right. So just as a general view into the editor, have any of you used UE4 before today? Good. Okay, almost everyone. So I want to go briefly into some of the tools that we use to show what's new in UE4, how we use it, and why we do it. Because a lot of these decisions that we've made through the years and how these tools are presented and how we use them have been influenced by the types of games that we make and our own personal workflow. And the process that I'm going to show you today is one that we have kind of honed through the years on the various projects that we've worked on, and totally recognize that it may not be applicable to you. If you're making a kind of 2D game on the phone, that our experience making a AAA shooter game isn't necessarily going to be 100% applicable, but hopefully you'll be able to pick up some good tips and tricks that are applicable. And then at the very end, I want to show you some other stuff that shows how indeed you can actually transfer some of these concepts over. Generally speaking, the first thing you see when you open up the editor is obviously the viewport, and this is your main gateway into the world as a designer. It's simply just a camera that looks into the world. This is your touch point where you interact with the objects and put things together, and you can kind of see what you're creating right off the bat there. When you select an object, you'll get the details panel, which gives you all the information about that. Again, nothing particularly new there, although there is some good presentation so you can actually see the source of where that asset came from and some of the materials or other aspects that are related to it that you can then jump to really quickly. One of the new things that we have up here actually is our scene outliner. And if I can turn myself around and skip out for a bit here. At first glance, it seems kind of strange. It's a list of all the objects that are in your world. Great, you can kind of double click on there and skip around to objects, and vice versa. When you do select an object, it shows you where that is in the list. Doesn't seem super useful at first glance, but there are some really cool things that you can actually do with this. For example, you can filter up on tops to search by actors. Like if I wanted to find square 8, square 9, you can, it'll highlight and help you kind of narrow down and find a few things, which is good for kind of hopping around and keeping track of where you are in the world. And you can also, you can see right now it has square 9, right now it has square 8, and as I hop between the two, I can actually grab, drag and drop, and I've created a little docking system here, like a little parent-child relationship, which is great because I can still select this asset and do anything I want with it. But when I go to the parent asset, great time for an autosave. When I go to the parent asset and select that one, it now recognizes that those two assets have a relationship, and you can actually move them together with just one click. So it's a really great way to say, oh, hey, here's a statue, and I have the plinth on the bottom, and then there's a bush that's next to it, and all the other things that are related to it. And when I select one of them, instead of moving one of them over 8 units and then forgetting one or doing things, and it's just a good time saver, really, to be able to just grab all those assets and move. And then in the next release that comes out, we'll have even further improvements to these tools where you can start creating folders and libraries and kind of organize them how you want to. So you can really quickly just grab all those assets and say statue 1 and then do a filter for statue 1 and grab all those assets and do whatever you want and manipulate them all at once. Over on the left-hand side here, content browser. Let me replace my plinth just because, which shows you all of your assets that are available to you as a designer. This is a full library of all the static meshes, animations, sounds, materials, everything that you can use to create the games or the worlds that you're working on creating. And getting stuff into the level is actually really, really easy. I can grab this battery because everybody wants a battery in their world. And where did it go? Stop doing that. There, it's moving over there. So it's just a matter of drag and drop. There it is in the world. And then you can manipulate it, move it, rotate it, do all the things that you want to do. All right. And then finally, go away. Up here on the top left, we have our geometry mode, or our mode browser. The main one I wanted to show you is the geometry mode. This is kind of a library of all the different assets you can add, lights, volumes, different actors. But the geometry mode is cool because it comes along with these primitives. And we used to have this concept of BSP in the editor, which is not assets that were created by the art team and then imported in, but are actually created in the editor itself. And now we just have these simple primitives that you can drag and drop, and boom, you have a playable surface. From right off the bat, you can start interacting with it, play on it, do whatever you need to. And then up here, you can kind of edit those in real time and just say, I want to select this surface and move it over. And I want it to be a little bit taller. You can do whatever you want with it and move it around. And it all updates in real time, and you can immediately go in and play. And that is super important to us at Epic because we don't put a whole lot of stock into theory crafting or even paper designs, really. That's not to say that we don't do them, but we try not to spend a whole lot of time in there because what's really important to us is being able to build quickly and iterate quickly. We want to not sit around and talk about, if I do this in a map, what could happen? I would much rather you build that, we do it, we play it, and we see what actually happens. And so the first step in building something is for us, is being able to just build it quickly and get in and play it. And that's kind of the first step that I want to go into here as well. And if our design process is actually separated out into 4 major steps. And the first one is that prototype pass. And again, this is not about visuals, it's just about going in and getting things done as quickly as possible. And I'll go into more detail there in a second. Once we have the prototype pass up and running, we'll start a meshing pass. And this is just a really, really basic first implementation of those meshes. And again, I'll show you what that looks like. And one of the reasons that we do this is that we totally recognize that everybody has a little bit of a different workflow. And especially in the early phases of a project, if the designers are prototyping something, the artists are going to just start building something. And so they can kind of work in parallel. And at some point, they're going to kind of need to cross so the artists can see what do my assets actually look like in a level. And this is that phase where the two kind of first start to come together. And then once we go to there, we'll start doing more and more detailed passes as we go along. Phase 3, which you'll see is where we start doing materials and lights and adding things. And then phase 4 is where it all kind of comes together, and that's where the real magic happens. But we will get to there at the very end. So starting off, you'll see this is our first pass. This is a really good representation of how we would actually build something, in that it's all really, really just basic primitives. We don't care how it looks. The lighting doesn't matter unless it's important to gameplay. It's not decorated. It's just really, really basic shapes. The only differential you'll see in there actually is the different color, the yellow floor, so you're against the white wall, just so like for gameplay purposes, your eye can make that out quickly. And that's super important because this is when we do the bulk of our gameplay playtesting as well. We'll just build something, likely in a couple hours, and then we'll get in and play. And you can just hop in and start playing, just like that. And again, that's super important to us because what you see in here is what you're actually going to get. I mean, there's no theory crafting about, well, what happens if I run up to this ledge and can't jump over it? Well, now you can just run up and see, can I actually jump over it or not? There's no worry about, oh, what's my line of sight out that window? I can actually see what it is and get there. I just hit a trigger that moved me to this little green guy here, moves you to the next world. And like I said, we want to be able to do this and iterate very, very rapidly. And so, for example, looking out that window, if for whatever reason we needed it to be a different size, a different shape, it's really easy to just come in and pull that over and then go right back in and play. And I mean, that's how long it takes to iterate doing this stuff, and that's exactly what we want. If we had waited till later, when that mesh had or that window had a pane of glass and a frame around it and a hole that was in the wall that was made up by two different meshes, and then there were some bushes behind it, and then when we selected all those and we moved them over, it created a visual hole that was showing something else we didn't want seen, so we had to fix that, and on and on and on and on. These are all problems that could be solved really easily in this case, where it's just drag and drop and then play. And we try and get to the point where the gameplay is solid and finished before we move into the decorative phases. And so all of our designers work together to try and basically get the gameplay done and make those important gameplay decisions before moving on. And another aspect of this is, generally speaking, we will actually try and stay to these very, very simple primitives because they become the collision space of your world as you move on. And so when you move into, if you watch this column here, and when you move into phase 2, you'll notice that these are now, we have some simple meshes that have been imported, but that column is pretty much the exact same shape as that primitive was. And in fact, what we end up doing is using that geometric shape as the collision volume, so that when we have a wall, for example, you'll note that the mesh that makes up this wall, the decorative elements, it wasn't placed on top of that primitive, it was actually placed behind it, and then that was turned into an invisible collision volume. And the reason we do that is because if you have a surface and then you decorate by putting meshes on top of it, you're invading that gameplay space, and you never know what the results of that are going to be. It could interrupt a line of sight to something you were trying to see. It could affect the way projectiles bounce around the world. There's any number of factors that could be changed, or even just making the gameplay space itself smaller is going to have some kind of impact. So we actually take those flat primitives and use those as our collision, and then decorate kind of within the bounds of that collision. The artists are free to go wild and crazy and do whatever they want. And in this case, you'll see that this is just as the meshes are being completed. It's still very, very early stages. If you look at the plinth, for example, it has this brick texture, which not coincidentally is the same one that's on the wall and on the columns and on the windows. It's just basically somebody created the basic geometry of the mesh, and then we got it into the engine as quickly as we could, so that we can start that process of conversion from geometric primitive to collision while the artists go on and continue to finish. And the reason that we want to do that is because that ensures that this map, even though it's starting to get some basic art in it, is still fully playable. We can still go in here and make changes if we needed to, or run around and test it, and so that no map ever kind of falls to the wayside and languishes and just is forgotten and then requires all these kind of dramatic, drastic updates. We can all do these incremental steps together. And then from there, once that phase is kind of complete, the artists will go into and actually start doing some of the more fine-tuning and details, which takes us to phase 3. Phase 3 is when we start adding actual materials to objects. We'll start actually thinking about lighting and the way that the lights and the materials interact. In some cases, maybe even, like here, you'll see this kind of marbled texture that's starting to show up on the columns. The brick surfaces here are now different than the brick surfaces that were on the walls. And again, because we're only updating lighting and materials, we're not doing any real geometric changes, this continues to stay playable, which is super important. And as we move out here, now the floor is starting to look like things, and you can see more bloom and things starting to come in, even some basic particle effects. And oftentimes, the purpose of this, at this point, this stage, is to convey kind of what the mood is going to be. And so I'm not really worried about what this looks like. I just want to say, I mean, it may even be a designer-created particle system. Just say, oh, I want some flames here. And then I'll hand that off to the artist, and they'll make this gorgeous system with sparks and smoke and all those other things. But I just kind of want to convey that simple idea of where we're going and what the lighting and systems might look like in a more finished map. All right. And then from there, of course, we go into the final stage, which is where things start to finally come together in a full system. And if you look at the original version of this map, right now you're seeing all the actors that are in that scene. And if I go back to number 4, you'll see there's all kinds of things floating around in there, and those are our reflections, those are our particle systems and our sound files and our lights and all these other things. And you can kind of see all the amount of work that was done there and how it kind of very slowly built on top of each other to create the final presentation of the map, which again is still fully playable. And that's, again, I can't say enough how important that is to us, that these things remain playable, they remain interactive, because at this point, we actually will play it. We'll bring all the teams together. And so it's no longer teams working in parallel. Now it's the artists are playing the game with the designers, and they're having discussions. They're saying, oh no, I needed this to be this way because, or hey, why did you make that decision? Oh, it was because of this. And then they can go in and test it and see together. And a lot of times, just bringing the teams together in that way and playing the map and seeing it and how it all comes together is where kind of these weird creative and new ideas come from, because this is when you get more brains kind of piled onto the process, and that's a lot of times that's where that magic comes from, and kind of helps build teamwork in a lot of ways as well. So I don't think there's anything really super shocking and groundbreaking in there. And as I said, this is how we have traditionally built our shooter type systems with scripted events and things like that. Before I move on, are there any questions on that kind of general process? Awesome. Okay, so that's how we've built games in the past. Now, as time goes on, of course, things change. UE4 in particular supports a wide range of games, everything from mobile on up to high-end PC games, AAA console, everything. And we recognize that. And I know that this process doesn't always apply to those, but UE4 itself does actually have some new tools that have helped us change the way that we build and really make this process a lot smoother and more interesting than it ever has been in the past. And I want to open a level. So in Unreal Engine 3, we had a scripting system called Kismet. And in Kismet, you could do scripted events within the levels where you could say, I'm going to run up to this door, and when I hit a trigger, the door is going to open and I can run through. And all of that is definitely still possible. Now, typically in the past, after you hit that trigger, it would disable. Could be a problem. If you wanted to walk back through that door, the trigger was on the other side, it would be hard to see. When the door did open, it was on a set animation path, so it would bump into you and push you out of the way. But we now have a new system called Blueprint, which handles all that automatically, and the designers can actually build that logic into the door system itself. And again, you could do this probably in Kismet, but it would be a lot harder. And this system, our new Blueprint system, open, book. No, that's not what I want. I want the door. There we go. Again, it's a visual-based scripting system, very similar to Kismet, but it's like Kismet exponentially better. And again, very simple. When something overlaps with the trigger volume around the door, get their location, and then we do some kind of math to figure out where the door opens, which direction, a little system there to swing the door open, determine which way it rotates, and then close it at the end. Nothing super exciting there either, except that where that used to live in the level itself. If I had 15 doors, I would have to go and script each of those doors individually. With Blueprint, now all of the components of this, the door, the frame, the animation, the sound, the trigger that's involved in it, are all actually one actor. And I can actually take that actor and duplicate it and do as many of them as I want all over the world, even across separate levels, which I could never do before. And all of them keep all of the information and all of the scripting and everything that was involved in that in every single instance. So I can do as many of these as I want and only ever have to script it and build it once. You can even actually make modifications to it, changing the door size, changing the meshes, changing the sounds, doing all kinds of crazy things to it. And it'll still continue to behave the same every time. So this is really, really cool because it saves our scripting guys a ton of work. Another great benefit to the Blueprint system is that we've actually started to take advantage of some of the more procedural generation stuff. Now, in the past, if I wanted to build a fence, I would have an artist build a fence mesh for me. And cool, there's your picket fence, great. And if I wanted to put it somewhere else in the world, I could do that. But what if the next place I wanted to put it was twice as long? Well, then I'd have to put 2 meshes. Or what if it was just 3.47 lengths? So then you'd have to start doing weird scaling, and it starts to stretch the actual geometry, which can have implications to messing with the materials and all this other stuff. So it was okay, but it wasn't a great solution. With Blueprint, you can do a lot more interesting things. This, for example, is a blueprint that has what we call a construction script. Now, the event graph is what I was showing you before, which is when I touch that door, the door opens. It's how it interacts with you in the world. The construction script actually says, how is this thing built as an object? And not to go into too much detail, but it basically says, I have a mesh, and that mesh, which you can see right here, is 2 fence posts. But you notice there's a lot more than 2 in that actual fence. So what it's doing is it's grabbing this origin point and this end point, and it does a little bit of math. It figures out how long is that vector, what's the length of 1 fence post, how many fence posts can I fit into that length, and then boom, it creates the fence for me. And the great thing about that is now I can grab that endpoint and move it around, and it's just going to continue to building fences for as long as I want to go. And then in the next area where I go, where it's a lot smaller, I can actually just grab that and say, oh, hey, that one's smaller. And that's still just 1 blueprint. I can actually even go in here. Where's the mesh that I found before? That worked quite well. And if I select this one, completely different mesh, operates the same way. It's still the same blueprint. It's still also, we can do different types of fences, different colors of fences. You can add different materials. You can do all kinds of different things to change the way this looks and behaves, all within just using the same blueprint that you can then use across levels and in all kinds of various areas. So this has really helped us, because if you think about this at a much larger scale, you could do the same thing to create a building. How many floors does it have? What do the doors look like? How does it have windows or bricks or all these different variables? And the person who creates that blueprint just has to expose all those out, and then you can change them and move them around, and you can populate an entire city block just by procedurally generating a blueprint that creates 1 building, and then just populate. So it's really cool. And another one, just again as a quick example, this is a collection of awesome gray and white boxes. And the person who created this blueprint has exposed a variable where we can say how many meshes are in there. Well, if I don't want 20, I want 50. And I don't like the 170 radius. I'm going to move that out to 320. And the construction script just tells it every time or when this thing is created, so every time that variable changes or when it's placed in the world, it's going to create X number of objects. It's going to put them all within that radius, and then pick a random scale and rotation. Now, in the past, for example, if I wanted to create a field of grass and flowers, I would have had to model each individual blade of grass or flower, and then I would have had to copy and paste hundreds of them, and then they would have all looked the same because they were all just copy and paste of each other, so I would have had to manually rotate and scale and do it with each of these things. Whereas with this, I just throw it down on the ground and give it a radius, and it does it all for me. And then again, I can use that in multiple places, in multiple areas. So it's a really, really great way to kind of speed up your workflow that really highlights the power of Unreal Engine, and then how it's really changed the way that we approach building the games that we're making. It's given us the power in Fortnite, for example, to do entire worlds that are procedurally generated. We can say this area is the forest, this area is the suburbs. And in the suburbs, you will not get the forest stuff, and in the forest, you will not get the suburbs, but it's different every time you play. Within the suburbs, I say, this is an area for a house. Well, there's 50 different houses, and it'll just pick one of them and randomly put them in there. So you never know what you're gonna get. And that's really had to change the way that we approach building things, and just kind of wrap our heads around all these new tools. But it's been so much more powerful because it's not just gameplay systems anymore. You can use these same things to create new weapons, to create new character classes, to do anything you want. You can really kind of use them to create an entire game or even individual pieces of a game, all within just the power of Blueprint. And as an example of that, I wanted to switch over and show you very quickly. So one of our artists one night was thinking about, I don't know, he got a bug and he wanted to build something. And so he built this awesome creative game. It's very, very highly complicated. I think there's a one-button control. And I'm sure you've all seen this before, right? Ooh, ooh. Every time I've done this, I've never made it past one. This is exciting. Aw. So, pure mastery right there. But what's cool about this is all of that stuff that I just told you about our process in building levels, there's the entirety of the level here. Doesn't really apply anymore. And this was one guy who spent one evening by himself, and here's the blueprint that he created that is the entirety of the game. All the animations, all the scoring, all the menus, every single aspect of it was created in this one blueprint by himself in one evening. So it really kind of highlights the power of what you can do with UE4 and how far we've come from those old days of blocking out things in BSP and worrying about holes in the world and really being limited in what you can do, where this is really kind of opens you up to a bunch of new ideas. So as I was saying, you can create a whole game here. And James is actually going to have a little bit more information on how you could do that. He could talk to it better than I could. Before moving on, did anybody have any general questions about this stuff specifically? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, wait, actually, wait for the microphone. Sorry.
You know those randomization things?
Uh-huh.
Are they templates that we can just use, or are they, you have to build them yourself individually every time you want one?
No, so either way, right? Like everything that we have here is content that comes, everything we're showing you here is content that comes when you download UE4 and you get it for free, and you're welcome to pick it apart, reuse the assets, move it into your own projects, however you want to do that. We actually encourage you to do that because, again, it's that rapid iteration, and you can learn from it and see how we built it and some of the things that we did.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. In the back row there.
When you're doing your randomization, is there a way of doing it based on a seed? So
yes.
you could direct the idea that it would be the same every time.
Let me open up real quick here. Dun, dun, dun. So again, there are multiple ways to approach a lot of these problems, and it really comes down to how the blueprint itself is constructed and what you choose to expose in there. This is another example of that same thing that I was just talking about with the grass. This one includes some extra math that traces down to say, what is the surface that I am on? So you'll see that as you move it around, the plants kind of go up and down, and even as you go off there, they'll go down onto the ground. And under meshes to spawn, was that where it was? Where did we find that?
Random seed?
Ah, yeah, random seed, there you go. So that's random seed 888. Wait, what did I just do? Oh, I closed that. That was silly. And so those are different there. And then as I go back to random seed 88, now you can see that they're back to being the exact same thing. So again, it's all on how you want to set it up and do all that.
Thank you very much.
Anything else? Awesome. Thank you guys very much, and I'll hand it over to James.